Good morning, fellow classmates and faculty members. I'm Aris, and this is Victoria. Today we will debate whether those who are neglecting adequate measures to control their weeds, having costly impacts to neighboring lands, should be taxed to reduce such case. Weeds are anything growing where they are not wanted. Proper weed control is a good practice that should be enforced because it leads to the betterment of crops as a whole.
Hi, I'm Kyle and this is Elena, and we're here to defend the current standard where farmers are not taxed for what others feel is inadequate weed control. Farmers are free to deal with their land as they see fit. There are no regulations or laws that apply to general weed control. This proposed tax would be an unfair burden on farmers who choose not to use herbicides or who cannot afford the cost of weed control. Weeds are a natural factor that farmers have to deal with. They have little control of weeds on their own land and no control of the spread of weeds to others' land. It is also important to note that farmers are not the only source of weeds. There are ditches, grazing leases, and nature preserves where weeds are free to grow with no control. I feel that this tax would have no benefit to weed control, but would impose unfair costs on farmers for their farming choices and for factors out of their control.
Okay. The treatment of weeds cannot be ignored, so it is necessary that impose higher tax on those individual farms to be lack adequate measure to control the weeds. Weeds can also cause human health problems. Many common weeds, such as passenger weeds, ragweed, ryegrass, cause asthma and other respiratory problems. Some weeds can also cause skin irritation, and some are poisonous. The worst case will cause people die. And if those pathogenic or deadly weeds spread to neighbor land, who will be responsible for this?
Well, we do recognize that weeds are a problem, but weeds can come from anywhere, and a lot of those weeds are more common on lands that aren't farmed, such as, like we mentioned, nature preserves and ditches and stuff. That's where they're more commonly found, and farmers have no control over weeds that are in the ditches.
Your weed control can be the best of the best, but there will be things such as birds, winds, water, vehicles, animals who could still spread it. Why should we pay more taxes if the weed control isn't always in our hands?
As a farmer does not have to, As you have stated yourself, there's lots of things that can carry these seeds, but the debate is whether dispersal of the weeds, if you are not adequately controlling your weeds, then you will get taxed, but if you have taken measures to control your weeds, you will not be taxed. So if it's coming from a distance, like if you as a neighbor have shown that you have adequately controlled your weeds and taken the measures to do so, you will not be taxed, but if you haven't, then you will be.
And also, nature is the only measure of transmission, but the source of infection is controllable. The responsibility for weeds spread can be divided into two parts, nature and owner. But we cannot let nature be responsible for this. So whoever pays for the damage of neighbor's profit is still not solved. And the question we want to ask is, when weeds spread to neighbor's crop, they will have an impact on their yield of neighbor crops. What do you think?
Well, we do acknowledge that weeds will have an impact, but from the different sources we found, the yield losses are not huge. Like in the worst of cases, they can be up to 6%, and that's from all the weeds, and it's hard to decide like what portion of those weeds comes from the neighboring farmer who you're blaming and what portion comes from other sources. So it seems like the neighboring farmers would be a very small portion of those weeds.
since weeds can travel many miles, how will you figure out whose land the weeds came from? There is no way to identify whose field the weeds actually came from.
We're not debating that those who do adequate control all of their weeds should be taxed. The debate is that those who are not taking adequate measure to control their weeds should be taxed. As you have stated yourself, it's almost impossible to prevent wind spread due to irregular natural events such as flooding, but as long as you are taking the adequate measure to control them, you will not be taxed.
Why are you concerned with seed spread if when seeds are controlled properly, if weeds are not controlled properly, the seeds aren't developing, making seed dispersal less of a concern?
Well, the reason we're concerned with the spread is because it can come from anywhere, and just because the farmer may have weeds on his farm, there's a lot of other sources, and maybe those maybe the farmer has done all he can, and for some reason he has herbicide-resistant weeds, or when he sprayed, he got rain after, and his chemical wasn't effective. So even though he put his best effort in, he still couldn't control them.
Most fields have ditches along the roadways and around them. There are tons of weeds growing in ditches. Will ditches be exempt from the tax, or will you tax the government because they own that land?
The Weed Control Act is in support of taxing those who don't adequately control their weeds. In summary, the Weed Control Act says that if owner or occupants of land does not maintain their weeds, they are giving a notice of inspection or warning. If not taken care of within the given time frame, then the municipality will take care of it. Then the owner or occupants of the land will be take charge of it. Pennsylvania's right to farm law provide farmers with some legal protection, which include how to deal with the weed spread problem of neighbors.
Why would you want to be against a tax that has a purpose of reducing costly impacts on neighboring lands, as well as reducing the weed populations?
We feel this tax is misplaced because there's so many other factors involved in weed control, and even though maybe the farmer has weeds on his property, he could have put every effort in necessary to control them, and because of like nature and facts out of his control, he was unable to get them properly controlled. Question for you. Since herbicides are expensive, they can cost up to $26 per acre. Some farmers may not be able to afford to spray their crop. Also, herbicide use is a choice. For example, many organic farms choose not to spray, and this can mean that they have lots of weeds. How can you justify a tax against something that is a choice and not required of the farmer?
Weeds cause 2.76 million tons in grain loss. Why are you concerned with herbicide costs if controlling weeds will be of a greater benefit than the herbicide cost?
And herbicide-resistant weeds are difficult to remove due to large area of GMO crop being planted nowadays. Weeds are more likely carry GMO factor. When herbicides do not prevent the spread of weeds, it's clearly that the price of herbicide is not important. Without herbicide, farmers still need to fight with weeds. In other words, after the weed carry GMO factors, the non-GMO crop which neighbor planted are in a very dangerous situation, and it is likely to cause our work in vain. How do you counter this problem if it do occur?
According to the article by the government of Manitoba, the presence of weeds in the crops does not automatically result in damage of yield loss. For example, aggressive weeds such as wild oats or green foxtail in a grain crop being cut as green fat will not reduce its feed value. Since weeds affect different crops and different farming operations in varying degrees, how will this tax be applied, and who will decide the degree of the damage from the weeds and how much the farmer should be taxed?
Weeds can be used as a good green feed, but the profit cannot be compared to growing crops. Furthermore, the amount of soil nutrients in a land is fixed, and the growth of weeds must be nutrients lead to nutrients competition. It would cause crop yield loss. Then who should pay for this loss?
We strongly believe that the proper weed control is a good practice that should be enforced because it leads to the betterment of crops as a whole. By imposing this tax, it would be beneficial as it would lower weed populations because of the incentive to control weeds.
Okay, we stand behind our argument that a tax on farmers for what is deemed to be inadequate weed control is not a good idea. Although weeds are a big problem, they are a natural problem and a problem that all farmers have to deal with. This tax would be misplaced as farmers' fields are not the only source of weeds. Even when farmers do everything they can to control weeds, they cannot be totally controlled due to factors such as weather and herbicides resistance. Farmers shouldn't be taxed on what nature has control over.